Welcome back to the show. Jason Bohn joins us here once again. And of course, he's the Clinical Director of Adolescence and COO of the Anxiety Center at Renew Counseling Center, serving the greater Kansas City metropolitan area. How are you today?
Oh, I'm feeling good. It's a beautiful spring, a little cold this morning, but a beautiful day.
Beautiful. Well, please say hello to your listeners and introduce yourself to those who may not know you as of yet.
Yeah, I want to do it a little bit differently. I know you kind of like my bio. I want to just introduce the concept of valuer and then walk through my bio and show how it applies.
Right.
Yeah, and so the valuer, just to start that conversation, is the part of you working out what you value, what's in your heart, what you care about, what makes your life meaningful. We use words like valuers, and you can think of it a bit like a compass. You can learn about value to help keep you live well, keep you doing things you love, and getting unstuck when you're having a tough time. Just like, when you're using a compass, it's going to continue no matter, even when you get to what you think is your destination, it's still going to keep pointing west. It's not like you arrive at west. And that's a lot like what a value is. And so when I think about applying that to my life, so then I'm going to walk through my bio. And I've phrased it this way, and in many reasons on purpose. I'm a Gen X postmodern question everything person who happens to be blessed with parents who took in orphans, prayed for food, answered their callings, and sacrificed so their children knew they were loved. I put that out there because I think just left to my own vices, or if I had really laissez-faire parents, I think I would have landed in that existential hopelessness kind of place because I literally questioned everything. I didn't like authority and really didn't want to listen, learned how to play the game early on so I could look like I was doing what I needed to, but it really wasn't on my own. It wasn't becoming an open, authentic self. Lots of doubt when I was young, lots of challenges doing things. And so my parents' values carried me for a long time. Their values pointed me in a direction. The boundaries they set kept me moving. And that mix, to keep going, created an irreverent soul that cares deeply for children, families, and especially adolescents. So I have close to 30 years of working with children, youth, and families, catalyzing change at the individual, family, organizational, and systemic or systems level. And even that 30 years, like I learned, I don't know, I was probably 5 or 6 and figured out that I really liked babies. By the time I'm 8 and 9 or 10, I'm playing with my cousins and children in the nursery. By the time I'm 12, my aunt and uncle have made me a godparent of one of their kids. Which, interestingly enough, both the child and I understood, and scared the death out of a 16-year-old thinking a 4-year-old might come live with them. But this value or passion for children and families carried me through all kinds of stuff, and it's about the only thread you can take through a very interesting career, and why I would deal with struggles of working at the federal government level, which really is challenging if you're energetic and you want to make things happen. It's a system that's very important, but it's hard to manage your values in. Keeping going with that, I'm a master's in clinical psychology. I knew I wanted to work with children and families in a professional method. I've provided crisis management, intensive in-home therapy, and wraparound services for children with emotional and behavioral challenges. And I will just tell you at times, and the reason I stepped away from clinical engagement for a while was that I could literally do the best work possible. And the most hopeful thing we could think of for some of the kids I worked with were that they would live in an apartment on their parents' property. So almost independent, but the value of children and families, I just looked at, well, what's next? How do I get through that struggle and use this skill. And it's part of the reason I did a stint in youth ministry, and then I went back into youth ministry. I have 20 years working or volunteering with youth. Turns out it's 30 now that I'm 50. I started at 20. So I didn't really do that math right. It made me push through and develop a mobile app for young people to help young people help other young people. That's a really tough world to stay in developing mobile apps. So that didn't last, but it really cultivated, my knowledge of how to do things in a little more innovative way, and how I could continue to meet my values moving forward. So currently I develop and direct the 210 intensive outpatient program for adolescents struggling with anxiety, depression, and identity issues. And this is one where I'm regularly talking to young people who are thinking about hurting themselves at the very least, and regularly thinking about suicidal ideation. And so the value of their life and strengthening that, and then strengthening that I can't handle them all on my own. So I need to build up my team of clinicians and have them be the most effective people that they possibly can. That value is kind of turning into trying to help other clinicians work with adolescents, because it's a hard time to work with, and clinicians have a hard time doing that, and families have a hard time finding effective clinicians. We talked a little bit about how to do that last week. But I'm kind of shifting some of my gears to run my program and help other clinicians do the individual work with these adolescents and families that I'm seeing in different and more effective ways. And following this value path, and sticking through the struggles, and working at federal level and state level and local level, metro level, and then individual level, it's really created, kind of sculpted me into an innovative, practical, and taught me to think about the whole net surrounding a young person, at-risk children, their families, and not just the individual clinical work that I and most clinicians are trained in. Just to finish off my bio, I have a wonderful wife, Corey, who founded and runs the Renew Counseling Center that I got to step into after I had worked my way up to an executive level in a nonprofit. But nonprofits have these years where they make no profits, and my whole department got cut. And so what do I do with those pieces? Because that's one of those moments where you can just be like, I'm stuck. I don't know what to do next. But knowing I cared for children and families, knowing I wanted to get back to my clinical roots and closer to adolescence, led to the development of the program that I run now. Finish that off, we've got a beautiful 10-year-old little girl, Nora, twin boys, Grayson, who's 5, and Jude, who went to heaven, and just want to talk about struggles in your life, losing people. You've got to find and have some kind of hope, something that is helping you to push forward. And so when I talk to young people about developing things that matter to them, finding passions, and talking to their parents about how do you help your young person find that passion to build grit, to keep moving through struggles. And those values have turned into adopting a couple of young people from the foster care. And so Chandler and Mila are now great, wonderful additions to our families. And we are figuring out what it means to be a family and really double down on that bonding. And so we're going to stretch ourselves and push that value of family bonding and rent an RV this I think June. And well, we've got it rented, but we're going to drive out to the Grand Canyon and help build their wonder and awe, which is one of those things we've talked about, that without that leads to some of the hopelessness. So we're working on doing that with our family right there. And so that's a little more of who I am and why I do the work I do. It's really based on the values that were built into me from my parents, and then have been cultivated through church and working with families over a lot of years.
Well, thank you for sharing that experience, your story, your journey, and your amazing love of family and children.
Yeah, thank you. So I'm going to try and dig in and explain a little bit more about values from the thriving adolescent perspective, the DNAV, discover, noticer, value, or advisor and valuers that we've been talking about from Louise Hayes, Dr. Louise Hayes, and I'm going to lose his name, Jim Cariaci. And so going to dive a little deeper into that. But regularly when my team talks, we talk about how every behavior, emotion, reaction has a purpose. Why do we feel pain when we scrape our knee? You know, it's a reminder that for the time being, our knee is more vulnerable to infection, additional damage, and that we should take even more care for it until it's fully healed, because it's important to our bodies. So when we start looking at young people who are struggling, you know, why is there so much anxiety, and why is there so much self-harm, and why is there so much, you know, suicidal ideation? We talked about some of those numbers last week. Why do we feel this? You know, our amygdalas were designed millennia ago to protect us from lions and tigers and bears. Oh my. But why now? What do we have? We still have this fight or flight mechanism built in. I know for a fact I've never had to run from a lion, a tiger, or a bear. Interestingly enough, I think anxiety and I think depression in young people is our body's way of reminding us that for the time being, we are more vulnerable to being hurt physically or emotionally by whatever is around us. And we should even take more care because we are important. And so that's just, you know, I still get nervous, not as much doing the show anymore. You're an amazing host, but preparing for it. But I speak in front of, and this week got to get back in front of an audience, and there is always a moment of butterflies and nervousness, because I care for what I'm talking about, I care for what I've prepped, and I care for the people that are there. And I think young people have lost that sensation that society in general cares for them. Lots of things seem to be just out for their time or their energy, their distractibility. And so it ends up leading to these struggles because they don't have things that they really value. They haven't cultivated this value of themselves, valuing of relationships. And so I just put all that together that I think this is coming up even on a at least national level, that we probably need to care more for our teens. We need to recognize they are vulnerable, and that this change over the last literally couple of decades, like 40, 50, 60 years from adolescence being a very short period and you went right into meaningful work, or you were already doing meaningful work for your family on the farm or anywhere else, to a very extended period from 12 and 13 up into 25 through college of trying to find yourself or figure yourself out, or adolescence as a whole. And I think that's just I think we haven't adapted to that as a society, and really our teens and the anxiety and depression is saying, well, we need to figure out how to care for them differently and better in these arenas. So the purpose of DNAV is to help us develop values and live with vitality. The Discover, Noticer, and Advisor, which I've hit on, provide means to engage in valued actions, supporting the values that lie at the center. And you have to pick those yourself. Young people, it's part of our job to help young people figure out what matters to them. It's part of a parent's job to help their young person understand the values, what matters to the family, and what then matters to them, that they will, you know, help guide them through the storms and confusing times of life, toward the things that they care about. And so I shared, I think I tried to share my bio as a kind of a positive example of values, but I want to also talk about what unskilled valuer looks like, because the valuer really influences behavior regulation. I don't think I've shared on here, but I am a lifelong Steelers fan. Started in 74, 75. And by the time I'm 12, they've won 4 Super Bowls, and nobody questions anymore why I like this team in Pittsburgh, nowhere near where I live. But a couple years back, a little while ago, one of our arch rivals is the Cincinnati Bengals, and we were playing a playoff game against them, and they hadn't won a playoff. Bengals hadn't won a playoff game in, I think it's decades. And in a game, they had us beaten. We were at least 1, if not 2 points behind, and at 60, 70 yards away from even, getting a field goal to tie or win the game. And there was like 30 seconds. They should have had the game won. There was a controversial play. One of the players got so aggravated and upset and started valuing his self-respect and being understood and getting his point across that he got a personal foul called on him. That led to so much anger in somebody else and so much frustration that they, again, not valuing the team and a win, that all they had to do was sit down and they would win the game, got another personal foul, literally gave the Steelers 30 yards. The next play, we kicked a field goal and knocked them out of the playoffs. That's a perfect example of, they had values, don't get me wrong, and they acted out of them, but their value of winning or the value of the team was not high enough to control their behavior. And I think we see this a lot in young people. Unskilled behavioral regulation looks like impulsive behaviors, such as cutting classes, blurting out, spending money, risky sexual behavior, risky online behavior, binging and or purging, drug and alcohol abuse, aggressive behaviors, suicidal and non-suicidal self-injurious behaviors, which would be self-harm. All right. And so, when you're seeing that young person isn't got enough things to live for. On the other hand, a young person that's skilled in behavioral regulation has a strong valuer. They're successfully able to regulate one's thoughts and behaviors in different situations, effectively managing stress, controlling impulses, and motivating oneself. I get many, many families come to us and say our young person has no motivation. Well, just the told to go to school and produce homework and stuff is not actually a value. That's just an action or an outcome. And so finding a way to have value in that is one way to get motivation. The skilled valuer, skilled in behavioral regulation looks like the capacity to take action, sustain motivation, and persevere through challenges through an identified goal. Is that making sense so far?
Yeah, it sure is.
Great. I want to, valued living and vitality often comes from answering questions that boil down to what for? Or the most recent teen was like, what's the point? What do I want my life to stand for? What's the point of my life? What's the point of this learning for? What is the point of counseling or IOP? What's the point of anything? What do I care about in this moment? What kind of person do I want to be? Those are the kind of questions, and having those kind of conversations with your young person and it can start super early. My 10-year-old and I are going through what matters to her and talking about those values and what that looks like. And it's a really fun. She gave a pretty high compliment the other day, in that it was one of the funnest times of her life when we sat there and had these meaningful conversations. And that was really, reinforcing of me to keep doing it for sure. Putting DNA V all together, discover, noticer, advisors, and talking about school, because that's a huge challenge. At least here in the Midwest, our young people in March started going back in person to school in big doses. And there's still significant school avoidance, even when it was on Zoom and they could do it from their bed. But sometimes that plays out in that a young person gets up in the morning and they don't feel good, probably because they stayed up half the night. That happens a lot with anxiety and depression. They're trying to distract themselves. That silence is hard. And their body's saying, hey, it'd be nice to stay in bed. So there's their advisor saying, you know what, they can't actually drag you out. And or saying it'd be more comfortable to stay in here. You're not ready for that math test anyway. And so they're still kind of sleepy. They don't decide to discover and try new actions. They're not thinking about their values, and they just go back to sleep. Well, sadly enough, and we've talked about that advisor, when they wake up at noon, that same voice that said, hey, don't go to school because that wouldn't be comfortable, it doesn't feel safe, starts saying, hey, you're an idiot. You skipped class, you didn't take this test, you're going to fail high school, you're not going to get into college, good luck having a career that actually pays for your lifestyle. And they will tell you that thought process goes just like that, super fast for a lot of the young people in my group. So they're into this cycle again of avoidance, because now I don't want to do it again, I'm behind. And we've talked about the cycle of avoidance, so we're going to revisit that next week. But change that around. So the night before, you spend some time. So you don't really value math per se, but what do you value about the school experience? Oh, I value my friends. I value getting to play basketball or baseball or something else. I actually value the process of getting ready and meeting girls and some of these things. And so then the next morning you wake up, and instead of listening to that advisor voice wanting to tell you to stay comfortable, you're like, well, my values are I'm going to get up and go to school, and for these other reasons, but I'm going to do the things I have to do. And so that's applying, a very simplistic way, valuer and the rest of the DNA pieces to getting to school. So there's some dialectics, and I like to come from this dialectic behavioral therapy perspective, DBT, which is one of the models we use from Marsha Linehan, with lots of good evidence of its effectiveness. But DBT, dialectical behavioral therapy. Again, decades of research and effectiveness for suicidal ideation, self-harm, borderline, all the stuff that I tend to work with. And some of the dialectics of values of adolescence are that there are challenges versus complaining. All right. Instead of just facing a challenge, they just want to complain about it. And sometimes we give in. We give in to that and let that matter more than facing a challenge. There's lots and lots of conversation around teens about preparing for the future. So this is for you to go to college, or this is so you have a career, and it's not actually about living in the moment or living in what's important right now and being present. It's regularly saying, well, whatever you're doing now is important for the future. It's not important now. So we're kind of teaching them that it's not meaningful right now in that conversation. We somehow think we can always get more time. Young people do think that, but that's the opposite of living in the now. If I just believe I've got the next 5 years to get this done, I don't really start it today. There are family values versus identity creation. So young people, it's literally their developmental task to create an identity. And sometimes that doesn't agree with their family values. Lots of the gender questions, lots of the sexuality questions are really at odds, especially here in the Midwest, with family values, and causes a lot of distress in families. And then there's the life enhancing things you do versus the life draining. All right. So if you can honestly say that, TikTok is life enhancing, then good. That's a value of you. And I know some young people who are trying to become influencers on TikTok, and it is actually life enhancing, the process they go through. But in other young persons, it's really life draining. And so are they doing more things that are life draining than life enhancing per se? And so you focus on values to create context. You help people then create actions in that context. And really, you just want to empower young people to know, clarify what brings them value or vitality, because then they're going to have strengthened their identity, and then choose value consistent actions. So that's always a interesting conversation. It's hard for almost all of us to connect actions to our values. Simplistically, if I value education in my young person, I'm putting money in a 529 account. That is an action that I am taking. But there are tons and tons of other actions that I also could be taking to move towards that. And I've got to actually think about that to make them happen. Values are constructed from our language. It's constructed from behaviors of behaviors that are intrinsically reinforcing, and values are constantly changing. All right. It's not a goal. It's not an outcome. Again, I can never, if I go west, I could land in Denver, but guess what? I could wake up that day and go west some more and be in California. I might wake up the next day and like, well, I don't even feel like going west anymore. And I backtrack a little bit and I don't live up to my value, but the next day I can wake up and I can still go west again. And so with adolescence, you've got to think about values as a little bit held lightly. Like they may say, I love this, and then not actually act on that for a long time. I can, an example of my life, I love pottery. I literally own a pottery wheel. I own a kiln. I have not made any pottery in a decade more. So it's still a value. I still hope to get to it, but it's not the most important thing right now. So in young people, things you can do to strengthen their valuer is helping them connect, have meaningful connections, helping them be mindful, noticing the moments, finding challenges they're willing to escape or accept and push through them. So I knew in my house, if I started a sports season or a play or something, my family was going to make sure I finished that. That was their expectation. I didn't have to do it, but if I chose to do it, I needed to accept the challenge and walk through it. Give to other people, care for yourself, and be active. So physical activity is actually strengthening an adolescent's valuer. And so I think that's about the time we've got. Are there any questions of anything I hit on today?
No, we're good. We actually skipped your break for you today because I know you're a great talker. This time we have to go. We're going to play the commercial at the end.
Okay.
But thank you. Tell our listeners how to contact you.
Yeah. Go to www.anxietycenterkc.com. The Adolescent tab has lots and lots of resources you can directly connect to for parents and for teens. And you can find out about our program if you're in the metro area. Again, I'm Jason at anxietycenterkc.com, and I look forward to talking to you about avoidance again next week.
Thank you so much for your time. And everyone else, stay tuned. More of the show is on the way.